All right. Good morning, everybody. Hoping that everything is running smoothly. We're trying a different format this morning. I'm joined by Andrea, our EDU lead, and also, as always, Alejandra will be behind the scenes. You're right now seeing a little bit of her video, maybe. I'm not sure, but welcome, Andrea. If you want to introduce yourself, I know that it's actually the first time we hosted somebody at the chat, so that's exciting.
Yeah, it's an honor to be the first guest here.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Andrea. I'm the education lead here at MakerBot and been here for about 5, almost 6 years. And 3D printing and education is a passion of mine. So super happy that Felipe invited me to the MakerBot chat today to talk about the Educators Guidebook.
Right, and then that's precisely the reason why Andrea's here. We are going to be talking this morning about the guidebook briefly because it's quite a lengthy project/resource for you guys to use. If you haven't heard about it, we published it. I think it's the 3rd edition, right, Andrea?
Yeah, it's the 3rd edition. The last one before this one was in 2017. And so there's been a lot of changes in 3D printing in education. And so we wanted to make sure that educators and students had accessible material to, changes in 3D printing and how it's being used.
Right. So in a nutshell, if you want to tell us a little bit, what this book is, who is it for? And then basically what we're going to do this morning is we're going to briefly talk about the book and then go through some of the pages, talk about some of the lesson plans. I have a few of them here, but let's start there. Like, what is this book overall? Who should read it? And what's the content in it?
Yeah, so this book, like you said, it's the 3rd edition of the MakerBot Educators Guidebook series. And so we first started writing these books, I think in 2015. And it first started off as a way for educators to see, how to use 3D printing at all in the classroom, right? How to start a print, possible lessons that you could use for 3D printing just to get started. And through that, we wrote the 2nd book, which integrated more lesson plans, more curriculum into the book. And then we took a break for a while with writing the books. And over time, we noticed how educators were actually using 3D printing and pushing it further in the classroom, going past lesson plans and giving students more control of the design thinking process, of the 3D printing process. And so we wanted to make sure that new educators and students new to 3D printing could have a material that they could reference for pushing 3D printing further in the classroom. So this book really takes students and educators through that learning curve of using 3D printing for the first time in the classroom, really what it comes with, some of the challenges that you might face, the wins, the fails, and then also walking them through how to actually push it further. So how to give students more control of the process, how to allow them to design think with the 3D printing process integrated into it. So this book is really for those educators and those students that are ready to really push 3D printing to new limits.
Right. And, I think that it's also important to know that, by the way, this is a free resource. I'm having it right here. It should be appearing on your guys' screens, at least the cover of it. And that's one thing that you are more than welcome to download. Like if you go to our page and specifically makerbot.com/guidebook will redirect you to the appropriate link for you to download the book. I'll take you through that real quick. So makerbot.com/guidebook, right? That'll take you to this form. And in this form, you're basically essentially just filling up the form, getting the free guidebook. And as Andrea was saying, it's a pretty comprehensive guide. You can see here, I have the PDF open here, a little bit over 150 pages worth of resources for you to use, completely and 100% free. As I said before, you can either go to the URL that I mentioned before. You could also go to, in our nav bar underneath education. So if you go to education, educational resources, there's the Educators Guidebook tab for you to, again, access this particular page and download the book for free. and yeah, I think, now we're going to go into a little bit into the details of what are the contents behind this book. I'm going to be browsing through it and allow for, Andrea to describe a little bit more. How did it come to be? What are the differences between this version or this edition versus the second one? It's actually been, as you said, Andrea, it's like 2 or 3 years since we released the second edition. So yeah, let's start with that. What has changed? Like you've covered, most of the new things. Well, no, not the new things, but you've described what the book is. But what has changed since the past edition and then now with this new edition?
So many things. I think the important part here, and I think you're in the first chapter of the book where we're talking about how to bring 3D printing into the classroom. And for that, I think, of course, here at MakerBot, we know a lot about the 3D printing process and, its place in the classroom, but we wanted to make sure that we brought in an educator to, who had firsthand experience actually bringing it into the classroom, both in middle school and in high school. And so we had educator Beverly Owens join us in the writing of this book so that she could really put in her experience and things that she's learned throughout the years incorporating 3D printing into the classroom. So she has questions that educators should be asking themselves, where is the 3D printer going to be located? How are the students going to be using it? Will they have direct interaction? Will it be a printer that's more, by the teacher's desk or in their office? And really things just to be mindful of when starting the process. I know when educators are first starting out with this technology, it can be very new. It's a printer they may not be familiar with. And so there's a lot of questions that they're going to be asking themselves. And so we wanted to make sure that we address those questions in the first go. And so Beverly really helped with finding the best questions, tips, and tricks to address in this first chapter.
Right. And speaking about questions, if you have any, you can, as always, send them out in our chat box to the, it's the right hand, top right corner. Alejandra will be collecting them and we'll be going through most of them at the end of it. And also, if you have any questions after the fact, so if you're not watching this live, you can also comment them down below. But yeah, so we were covering right now like the first chapter, right? That basically talks about the educators that we partner with, the type of content that we will be sharing throughout the book. And there's a really interesting concept that we introduced, I think, for this book, which is the different sort of, I don't know how would you call it, Andrea, but like the complexity levels of some of these lessons, meaning how we go from something that's very, in a way standard, let's call it basic for a second, if I may, but a fairly straightforward lesson that essentially allows a teacher to just print something to demonstrate the concept of 3D printing as a whole, going all the way to something that's what you're calling student-led, student create. That's a much more comprehensive project. I have a few examples of those here that will demand much more interaction, attention, involvement in the classroom overall. But let's talk about those 4 degrees of difficulty that, in the lesson plans that we are offering.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's always been, so these types of projects have always existed, but I think it was never actually categorized into these components. I think as an educator goes about, learning how to use 3D printing and then showing it to their students, and then really starting to push it, you start to see those different levels of integration across these projects. So the first one is, I think everyone has done, when they first get a 3D printer, they just want to print something, right? Anything, just to see how the printer works, seeing how, layers actually stack on top of each other. And so those are the exploratory prints. Those prints are typically designs that you're going to find off Thingiverse. Usually, teachers have students look up, maybe their favorite animal, or designate a classroom 3D printed pet as well. And so I have something like that here showing just like a saber-toothed skull as well. So this is very exploratory, just seeing, how a shape is actually developed, right? So there's not an actual lesson plan built around it, but it's very much just exploring the concept of 3D printing. And then getting into the teaching aids, I think, is something that is super great 3D printing is really great for teaching aids because teaching aids can be expensive, right? They can be largely inaccessible. And when educators are trying to innovate on their lesson plans, showing their students abstract ideas, 3D printing is great for that because I don't have examples here right now, but you can print different math models, you can print animal cells, plant cells, things that you would typically, or as students, typically only find in a textbook, right? And so it's very different when students are actually able to manipulate those objects and actually see, how the curve of a specific equation actually looks and feels like. And
right. Oh, I was going to say, like the example that you mentioned, and since you were talking about like some of the teaching aids, this is an STL that we downloaded also from Thingiverse. It is actually the section of Mars, maybe, where the Mars rover just landed. And, that's an interesting concept overall for 3D printing, right? How it's applicable, or the use goes beyond just 3D printing on its own, but like it becomes a source of tools maybe for teachers where you can just, hey, we are talking about Mars this morning or this week. Let's print out the terrain where the lander landed. And of course, and try to learn more about the topography of Mars, what are some of the features, and get a proper physical understanding of what that is, right? I think that it does help a lot, at least it did for me. When you have a physical element to make that connection, both emotionally, but also like, cognitively, I think it's something that adds to the learning process of you as a student.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to refer to educators, particularly history educators, being able to 3D print artifacts, that students would never be able to touch because they're behind a glass or stuck in a textbook. And so actually being able to touch something that took place in history is amazing.
Right. And actually you reminded me of those. We have a full collection. I think it was that we did way back in the day with the Natural History Museum.
Yes.
That's actually like real 3D scans of their fossils, right? So you're actually touching a replica of the real thing that's hosted right here, actually, in the Natural History Museum here in New York. And you're essentially touching something that you would not in a million years be able to touch it until you had like 27 degrees under your belt and have, 5 PhDs to access those fossil records. Exactly. So that's definitely interesting.
Yeah, it really makes it so much more accessible to the students and so much more interactive. They're able to form those connections to their curriculum, to what they're learning. And that really transcends into part of the lesson category. This one is more, I think, what we considered in the last book, the bread and butter of the curriculum. So lesson plans that educators develop using 3D printing as a tool to help carry that out. So an example of that could be making musical shapes, right? And seeing how adding different types of materials can change the sound that these musical shapes make using 3D printing. Or creating, one of my favorite lessons from the last book was weather survival, where students had to actually create different types of structures to survive inclement weather, right? And so it was a whole activity that students create this foundation, they put it in rocks, throw water at it and see, if the house or structure gets washed away. And so they study how different structures can survive in these types of environments better than others. So really great to show, I think without 3D printing, there's definitely ways to work around it, but with 3D printing, you're allowing students to actually take a step in actually creating these types of designs and really being part of the lesson plan instead of being, more of a passive learner. They're active in this process.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of the, student-led. I think you mentioned quite a few already, like a student-led, student create. I have couple of the grippers, but I don't know if you want to go through some of the lessons now, or do we want to double down on like the student-led, student create component?
Well, I can talk about it just real quick. So the student-led, student created really just, it focuses on the student design thinking process. So part of the student really, either they're given a prompt or something to design a solution for. And so they're really starting from scratch here, right? It's the onus is on them to actually create a solution. And through that, they have to ask questions, get to know, who or what problem they're designing for, and then go through that iterative process of designing something, it maybe not working out the best way the first time or the second time or the third time, and then learning from each and every iteration, taking that learning, incorporating it into the next design to get closer to that final solution. And so we do have a couple of examples that we'll get to here later in the book.
And one other question that we get a lot, Andrea, speaking of how to print these projects, and that's why I kind of have both printers behind me, or kind of like our main printers behind me. What are the printers that are best suited for this particular book? And we, I think I know a few elements here, but if you can speak a little bit on what's the setup that any particular teacher should aim for in order to use this book?
Yeah, so typically, of course, this book is written in mind with the sketch printer, which is to, I believe, the right of you. And so typically the sketch printer, it usually comes in actually bundles of 2 just to optimize it for classroom printing. And that's really what we want to be using these printers for. So having that printer really allows you, and super friendly, by the way, for students and for educators that are new to 3D printing, really allows you to print quick and also see those designs and validate design decisions quickly. The other great thing about that printer is that it comes with quite a few large spools of filament for that classroom printing to make sure that you're not running out of filament, halfway through the class. And so you can keep on printing. But the other printer that comes that we wrote in mind for this book is also the MakerBot method. This printer is a bit more advanced, but the great thing about this book is that as it walks you through the book, the projects do get a bit more advanced, right? And as students feel more in control of the technology, the method printer is kind of the natural next step to continue pushing, design thinking and the 3D printing process overall in the classroom. It has a few more advanced capabilities and allows students to print more complex designs if they're testing for specific components, or they want to put their prints under, different types of stress. This printer really allows you to really push that further.
Yeah, and I know that I'm scrolling fairly fast here, but as I said before, I'll say it again just in case you missed it before, but this resource is entirely for free. You can just download it and go ahead and sketch, scroll through it yourself. I'll repeat the URL in case you missed it. MakerBot.com/guidebook, for you to get the free copy of it. And yeah, it's kind of like, as I said, it's over 150 pages, right? And you can see how, as Andrea was saying, we go through the specifics of how each of our printers work, what are the main considerations to keep in mind when starting to print, how do they work, what materials do they use, what are the different projects that you can create. And then, we come into what's we call section 4, right, Andrea, which essentially takes you through, what you're here for, the first couple of projects that you will be able to achieve. And we've actually spread the projects into different sections as well.
Yeah, so these are spread into natural sciences, mathematics, engineering, robotics, and then art history and music. So we wanted to make sure, that we didn't just stick with science, technology, engineering, and math. We wanted really to incorporate everything because 3D printing is such a great tool for cross-curricular projects, right? So things that span across history, mathematics, and engineering and art. We wanted to make sure that that was something that educators were aware of, that 3D printing isn't just for the engineering class, or it isn't just for physics, right? It's something that can span multiple subjects. And here, as Felipe is scrolling, we wanted to make sure that we covered those different project categories that we had mentioned in the beginning. And so here, through these lessons,
the art section, just
yes, and that's in particular my favorite section, I think. But we wanted to make sure we had projects written in mind for for teaching aids, for part of the lesson, and student-led, student-created. In particular, student-led, student-created, because students are able to adapt to this technology so quickly. And so they will take ownership of this technology and quickly push it further. And so we wanted to make sure we supplied you with project ideas that you could take into the classroom.
Yeah, and as you can see, like each of these, well, they range in I would say, complexity and then also possibilities, right? You sort of leave it a little bit open-ended for some of the educators that are more comfortable with the concept already, so that they can, as you were describing with this idea of part of a lesson, sort of start, the goal here is for them to get started on their own lesson creation, right? Similarly to what happens in the certification program. It's like you start by just printing off the shelf, if I could call them that, off the shelf parts from Thingiverse. But the goal here is for educators to be able to create their own lessons at the end of the day, right?
Exactly. We want to make sure that we're giving them the tools and the guidance to be able to take this knowledge home at the end of the day and be able to create those projects themselves. Because once educators are able to sort of build on that fusion of 3D printing and education, that platform, they're really able to leverage that the technology, as a tool that they can use, that they know, like the back of their hand, to really employ in any way that they see fit in the classroom.
And getting to the end of it, and also because I want to keep some time open for questions, last chapter, I believe, chapter 5, which you called Tricks of the Trade. Let's talk a little bit of that, and then we'll jump into the questions that we have been collecting in, through that chat box on the right.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we've seen through the years, educators really, when they take control of 3D printing, they come up with different techniques that, may not be as obvious the first time around, right? And these are techniques that are super helpful in the classroom that help to push 3D printing a little bit further and in ways that, one might not think as a first impression. And so we collected a few here from, how to make prints, multiple colors, how to print larger than the actual bill plate. Like, for instance, the Sketch Classroom printer is a bit smaller, but that's not entirely too limiting, right? So you can still work around it. You can still make designs that are actually much bigger than the bill plate. I think, Felipe, you have an example of the claw print behind you. That is that one. There we go. That's definitely much larger than the bill plate, right? So you're not limited by it. You can print in parts, and you can even maximize the size of some objects to print larger. And tips on reducing print time, because we know 3D printing can take some time, right? And so we know that educators are always short on time. So we wanted to make sure we provided some ways, to save time, to save filament as well. And then these are some advanced ones.
Yeah, I know that it's, we will not have time this morning to go through all of them. And that's kind of the point, right? We wanted to show off the resource as something that's great for you guys to use. Incredibly, I would say incredibly, well, it's redundant, but incredibly useful, right? As a resource, just because of the breadth of concepts that we are covering, for that go all the way from the very basic stuff. How do I start off my printer? How do I load the material? What materials I'm going to be using? To the more comprehensive stuff that Andrea was describing, essentially touching on what are the lessons that I can create, what are some of the design considerations that I should keep in mind, basically those tips and tricks on how to get the most out of your 3D printer.
And showing examples as well of how it's used, within different types of industries, right? I think students often think, when am I ever going to use calculus in the real world, right? But you can actually see we've included a few industries here, not all of them, but you can see how 3D printing is actually used, in the real world. And so it's a direct example for students to see, what they're learning right now in the classroom correlates to what they may be using in their future careers.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about that feeling of, hey, the pros, right, are using the same exact tool that I am using, right? So essentially, both of these printers I love the sketch. There's a lot of people that may think that it might be a little bit more of a basic printer. It's not, but seeing that you have professionals getting these printers out there and getting these incredible results with them, I think it's also really encouraging. I think to your point, Andrea, on how is this relevant? How am I going to apply this? Well, here's kind of an obvious answer that I wish I had back in the day, right? A more direct connection to what does that mean for me in the future.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and with that, I'm going to ask Alejandra actually to jump in with some of the questions that we have from our audience, just to cap our chats today. So yeah, Alejandra, I don't know if you have any questions back there.
Thank you, Felipe, and thank you, Andrea. It was a great way to get to know this guidebook. I hope our audience downloads it. It's incredible information at your fingertips. Can you just let us know maybe a few different printing times and different items that you printed for the guidebook?
Well, I have a few here at hand. So for example, I have this gripper that Andrea was describing before. These overall, it's complete. Well, I'll give you a straight answer first. This is probably, you're looking at, a little bit over 15, maybe 20 hours. The complicated part is that, as Andrea was mentioning, this was printed in sections, right? So this bottom section took about 10 hours. Then these longer fingers, probably about 3 hours. These little guys here, about, a couple of hours, and plus the center rod. That's actually the sort of pin that, sorry about the noise, but the pin that activates it all took another 2 hours. So when you add that up, it's about 20 hours. This guy, the sample from the Mars surface, this was about 8 hours, if I'm not mistaken, on the sketch. It all depends, right? And there's a range of them of lessons in the guidebook, from something that will take, essentially 30 minutes, 20 minutes, to more comprehensive lessons where the limit is more on the student or the educator, right, Andrea?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of it is dependent on how involved you're going to make these projects. Some of the projects are fairly straightforward. They're you know exactly what you're needing to print, and so some of them can take about an hour and a half to print. But like the example that Felipe had, those are much more involved, right? Those are going to be more of an iterative process that you're having to print over and over. And then we have that amazing print as well. And Felipe, how long did the fingers take to print, for instance?
This is really fast, surprisingly. I think that this one, the fingers were probably like an hour and a half. The rest, the black blocks, we're talking around, another 2 hours. And then the little green
Pins.
Not joints, the screws, right? Another 40 minutes. So overall, not more than 10 hours, right? Really fast print. The complicated part comes with the assembly of it, because as you can see, it uses strings to activate string and elastic string to activate the motion of the hand. This is actually a demo of a prosthetic hand. Yeah, but it depends, as Andrea was saying.
That's incredible. Guys, will the guidebook be available as a hard copy? I know our previous editions was available in that format. Will it be available this time around?
Yes, it will be available. So we're ultimately looking to hopefully have the hardcover available sometime in the summer, hopefully before the new school year starts. We want to make sure we get that resource over to you guys, but we're hoping for it towards the end of summer.
Fantastic. And we do have more questions, but we're running out of time. But one important question that I got several of, they want to know if our printers are network compatible.
Yes, they are network compatible. So both the printers behind Felipe, you can connect to the network. You can actually connect to our cloud-based printing software. And so that software is really great because it helps educators connect all their printers to one place. and it actually helps give them, give their students access to send files to the printer or to their educator all in one place. So you no longer have to wait to receive all the files to your email account or to your Google Classroom. You can have them all within MakerBot Cloud Print, and then from there, just send them off to the printer. So really, really great tool to use.
Yeah, and as always, you also have, I used to be a diehard for it. Like you have the standard off-the-shelf USB port if you wanted to print that way. I used to be that way. Then I started playing with Wi-Fi and cloud printing. It's just amazing. I mean, you just have to make the jump, but yeah, both of them equipped with Wi-Fi and Ethernet access points. Well, via USB, but yeah. Do we have anything else, Alejandra? Otherwise, we'll start wrapping things up.
Yeah, we have a couple questions. Well, actually, you just answered that. We were asked if they need a flash drive to work the print, or you should connect to a device. Well, Felipe just said that you can do that wirelessly, which is incredible.
Yeah, it's an option, either or.
If someone is asking, what is the easiest colored material to work with? What type? Yeah, colored. They want a type of spool that it's going to be for a beginner level.
Well, we have, it depends on the printer. I think if they're asking for beginner level, it's going to be on the Sketch. And even if it's on Method, it's typically going to be PLA or tough PLA if they're looking for a filament that's easier to work with students. The properties of those materials are great to work with for beginners. For color, in terms of what photographs better, I really like the color, the orange there. I think the blue also, I mean, really all the colors look great. I'm a big fan of the
materials perform the same regardless of the color, right? There's no one material that's easier to print based on the color. But as I'm saying, it's more, I guess, it's a way to get better involvement from the students, I suppose. And also, like, you know, as an engineer, as a designer, it's something that can allow you to highlight elements within the assembly, right? So it's like, it can be used in many different ways.
A couple of educators are asking, in terms of pricing, what would be the most economical spool material to work with?
Most economical, I mean, it's always going to be PLA or tough PLA. I believe, Felipe, correct me if I'm wrong, for Sketch, I think it's around $65.
Yeah, but you get like the spools in the Sketch, and I'll just open it here. The Sketch spools are pretty massive. They are 2 kilos. I think, yeah, 2 kilos, which is almost 4 pounds of material at $65. So, yeah, and you know, one of these spools will probably last me a good 200 hours, just to throwing a number out there. I don't know the exact number, but it'll last you a long time for you to you know, finish up one of those spools. One question that we get really asked a lot is, you know, how often will I need to buy new spools? 5 of these will probably take you through a semester easily, depending on the amount of, you know, if you have 200 students, and it's another story, and you probably need more than one printer. But yeah, I think 5 spools, which is is it the standard that the Sketch comes with? The
Sketch
spools?
Classroom, yeah. So if you buy both 2 printers, it comes with 4 large spools of filament and 2, I'd say, medium-sized spools.
Yeah. So I think that we might have a few more questions, but we are a little bit over time, so I'm going to cap it there. Thank you guys all so much for attending, and of course, thanks so much, Andrea, for joining us today. You're our very first guest speaker
I'm
here
honored.
at chat. We're looking forward to do more of these, you know, kind of inviting more people, and of course, Andrea again to talk more about education and 3D printing. But for now, if you have any more questions, do send them out to hello@makerbot.com or through our social media channels. You can also post them down below in the video. But yeah, I don't know if you have any last remarks, Andrea, for now.
Yeah, no, I think we're really excited for everyone to see this book, especially for new educators out there that are full of questions, asking, you know, how they're going to push this technology forward in the classroom. So definitely download the book. It's free. Check it out. Share it with other educators who are also looking to start 3D printing in the classroom.
All right. Well, Thank you guys so much for joining. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
Guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.